Welcome to Permission Slip Granted. This week, we're talking about authenticity and vulnerability. Ready to dive in?
Just when things get really tough and you find that inner resistance, just lean in a little bit more each time. And I feel
experienced true joy in just being my authentic self.
Those people that are holding space for you to take up space, those are the people that are meant to be in your life.
The more we practice that, the more we kind of pause before we make a choice.
That is inviting you to have the ability to hurt me.
None of us are completely perfect.
I feel like a lot of people have walls just to protect themselves because there's been hurt in their past.
Saying, you could hurt me, and I'm still going to show up just as I am.
One's around, the other's lurking, right? So if one...
Wait, I can do that? I didn't realize I was waiting for somebody to give me permission.
You are not the same as anybody else because we all have different paths that led us to this amazing place that we call today.
Giving to them doesn't have to take from me.
Being vulnerable doesn't mean oversharing. It means
Yes.
allowing yourself to be seen. We want to welcome you guys back to Permission Slip Granted. This week, we're going to start diving into a topic that's near and dear to all of our hearts is authenticity. It's a buzzword you hear often, right?
Yeah.
What does it really mean? We're going to dive into that into this show. So it's about showing up for your true self, no mask, no pretending. But here's the thing, being authentic isn't always easy. Why? Because it requires something uncomfortable. Do you ladies know what that is?
Vulnerability.
Yes, vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
I get an A+ on the quiz.
Awesome. Yeah, we're very big fans of Brene Brown here. So you're going to hear a lot of us, a lot of the references probably coming from her because I think she's impacted each one of us in so many profound ways. So we want to go ahead and you want to open us up there, Miss Kylie, on the.
Yeah. So I think I kind of led the charge. I think a couple of us were aware of her, but hadn't really done a lot of reading, but she has been my soul guide for a solid 7 years now. One of the first things that I ran into was her TED Talk, which has, I want to say like over 11 million views. It might be even more than that now, but that's what kind of got her out into the mainstream. And it was talking about the power of vulnerability. And one of the quotes that she talks about is that authenticity is a collection of choices we have to make every day. And one of the biggest choices, that choice to be vulnerable. With that in mind, I think it's important to recognize that most of the world defaults to vulnerable being a weakness, right? They put it into that sphere of where is an animal vulnerable to the predator that's going to get them? And somehow that has translated to us as humans, that the things that make us vulnerable to, the predators of today, right? Those things are weaknesses, but there's actually great strength to be found in vulnerability because it allows you to have your truest, authentic expression in your day-to-day life.
I feel like we get so hung up too on what the Webster definition is of words, and we forget to put our own inflection behind how are we going to show that up in our lives? Like, how is that word going to impact us? Whether it's something as trivial as fun versus vulnerability, right?
Absolutely.
That those have to be lived out through action in your day-to-day. And one of the things that I love, first of all, you mentioned Brene Brown to me when we first met, and that kind of like was a catalyst to like, oh, I need more about this person. So her book, The Gifts of Imperfection, was paramount to me and my own self journey. And one of the things that I remember in that book was the collection of choices that we have to make every day. And that biggest choice that we have to do is to choose vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a default that we have as humans.
Right.
Right? It's and it's not easy. And you'll find yourself, the other thing I think is to view it more as a practice, not so much as, oh, well, I wasn't vulnerable in this big moment in my life, so I guess I'm not a vulnerable person. No, it just means in that moment, that was the choice that you made. And there's no judgment behind that. So it's more about that practice of vulnerability and choosing the direction for your life to be one that is led with vulnerability.
Yeah, I just looked up the definition just because I want to be able to clarify for
Yeah.
people. They're not my words, but the words that are actually written. It says capable of being physically or emotionally wounded, open to attack or damage.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I can understand how there could be like misinterpretation there, but I think the ability to even open ourselves allows people in, right? There's this like thing about being connected and vulnerability and how they need to live together.
Yeah. You see it a lot in relationships, right? When you have, whether it's a romantic relationship or not, when people build up walls, inevitably there's not as deep of a connection, right? If you think about friendships in the past that you've had that have been more surface level, whether it was, a drama, a fight, whatever, that friendship faded, possibly, most likely, because there was that lack of meaningful connection, which only comes when we allow ourselves to be open to attack, right? That is the deepest form of love, is saying, you could hurt me and I'm still going to show up just as I am, open to that.
Something that you said there with like friends came up for me right there. The idea of friends when you're kids versus friends when you're adults. Things shift. There's like a paramount shift, right? We're not spending all the same time with around the same people every day in the same age group with the same likes and the same journey, right? We go off and now we have different journeys, and proximity is huge with our connections and people, but also that open space of being like, I'm open here to receive you. I'm not going to wall you off. And then there's the expectation that comes in there as well, right? So it's like, if I'm going to be vulnerable, you need to be vulnerable too. Or if I'm going to show my true colors, you need to show yours too. I feel like a lot of people have walls just to protect themselves because there's been hurt in their past. And it's a choice to allow people to be who they are and accept them for who they are, not who you will them to be. Yeah. It's coming up for you over there, Sydney.
Well, yeah, y'all said a lot of really great things. What comes up for me and making those choices is like authenticity is a collection of choices that we make every day, to uncover our truest selves. And that is so real. And like, the more we practice that, the more we kind of pause before we make a choice and truly like connect to ourselves and honor our truest selves, we become more of our truest selves. So it's an evolution, I believe, because none of us are completely perfect, but like meeting our truest selves is like one of the greatest like acts of self-love, right? It's just like honoring ourselves and making choices that resonate with our truest self, which ultimately like makes us come into full alignment, right? Are y'all following me? So like for me, stuff like making choices that are people pleasing type choices or stuffing our emotions down, or coming, like you said, Kristen, coming into a friendship thinking, oh well, I'm going to be vulnerable and that person has to be vulnerable too. So what? Like maybe in that instant, at that divine time, you were supposed to make that impact on someone, right? That you were supposed to be in alignment, be your truest self, and you have no idea how that impacts other people, right? Maybe they'll go home and you have changed that person's life because they knew you were being extremely authentic and you inspired them. So I want to encourage people listening, like, it's okay to show your colors, to show your true self, and it feels uncomfortable, but the more you make those decisions that align with your truest self, I feel like that muscle will, start to strengthen, and you'll become more confident in being authentic. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I think that let's not forget to mention that those people that are holding space for you to take up space, those are the people that are meant to be in your life. The people who aren't allowing you to be that version of yourself that you know you need to be authentically who you are, to allow yourself to even be vulnerable to people who are worthy of your vulnerability. Like you gotta you gotta make that discernment. Like, is this a true person that's lifting me up, or is this a person that's minimizing me and not allowing me to be me?
Right.
Absolutely. Sydney, something that you said reminded me of another Brene Brown quote. I don't remember in which book, but she talks about how when we are authentic, it gives other people permission to be authentic, which I think just is beautiful for us to discuss here at Permission Slip Granted, right? Because it's not that we need some external force to give us permission to do something. And yet, how many times in our lives have we been like, oh, wait, I can do that. I didn't realize I was waiting for somebody to give me permission. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's one of those like lead by example and just show people that, hey, this is where I'm at. This is where I'm going to meet you. This is how I'm going to show up for you. And even if that's not where they're at right then, like you said, it might be the catalyst to begin that journey for them.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So I want to ask you ladies, I know we talked a little bit about what vulnerability is, but how does it show up for you guys? What is it in your life? Like if you could think about what it means to you for authenticity versus vulnerability.
You have to have vulnerability to be authentic. You can't not be vulnerable. To me, you have to have both of them. They're like cousins, like anxiety and depression. Like like you gotta, if one's around, the other's lurking, right? So
yeah, I like
practicing vulnerability, I think, leads to authenticity, and as it's hard to be like, was I my truest self at that moment? When you stop and like maybe think about a conversation or reflect on your week or reflected on, a certain situation or a question that you were asked and you answered. And I think it's good to not overthink those things, but also kind of just like reflect, once in a while and be like, okay, like, am I really like expressing how I'm truly feeling inside? I think that's a really great question to ask ourselves.
Yeah. Were you done, Cindy? I didn't want to cut you off.
Yeah,
okay. Yeah. So authenticity, what does it mean to me? Brene Brown, I know it's going to be on repeat, people. So
that we were going to be mentioning her a lot today.
I know. I'm just laughing at like this is like the fifth time. She has a podcast and she did around New Year's a couple of years back. She did a value alignment exercise, and she had all of these different values and kind of walks you through trying to figure out your one or two core values in life. And authenticity is one of them for me. For me, it is interwoven with my why. I spent so much of my life within the confines of a high demand religious cult that told me exactly what was acceptable, from the way I dressed to the way I did my hair to the volume at which I was supposed to speak, laugh. Not kidding. There's like an actual promise that religion makes about loud laughter, and that you won't do it. So it was showing up in all of my life. And as I began to question this experience, more and more layers came off. And so for me, it is integral to my day-to-day living experience. I mean, just this past weekend, I was with over 2,000 musical theater teens and kids and all their parents. And I experienced true joy in just being my authentic self. I got up and down with the kids dancing. I was singing. I did not give a flying fuck if somebody thought I was being too loud, too much. And so
Hearing you took up space.
yes, because it wasn't about them. I think that's the biggest piece is with authenticity, there is not a need for external validation because it is grounded in this deep knowing that I am enough, that I can take up space, and that no matter what shows up, even if it is imperfect, even if I fuck it up, it still is me. And in those instances of mistakes, I will know how to resolve it. One of the things that Brene Brown talks about is when we are not vulnerable, we end up numbing so many of our emotions and feelings, and we can't selectively numb. We can't just be like, oh, I don't want to feel the pain, but I'll just feel joy. No, you numb everything. And so then you're just
yourself,
right. You're just going through life in this survival day-to-day mode, which is where I think a lot of people find themselves. And so breaking out of that is just so important for having a full experience of life.
Yeah, I think you mentioned something there really, really profound in the fact that we choose to numb all parts of ourselves when we're trying to turn off one part of ourselves. And I think that in order to even find the joy that so many people are longing for, the connection, like this epidemic of loneliness, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're so connected, but so disconnected in the world today. And and that was actually one of the questions that we had prompted. How do you think social media affects our authenticity / vulnerability, right? And so we can talk about that in a second. So Kylie, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned that you didn't care. You were just authentically yourself during your trip with Where do you think that came from? Because I feel like a lot of people, I know for me, I'm sure you guys in your client practices as well, that there's a lot of fear that comes up of judgment, to be even an inch of authentic self in the public eye. Like at home, it's easier, but when you're out in the public. So what do you think that that beautiful gift of authenticity came from for you?
Well, I don't think it's one specific moment. Like I said earlier, it's a practice.
Right.
Over time, it has just become easier. The more authentic I am, the easier it is to let go of other people's expectations.
Yes, the muscle memory.
So the more I lean in, the easier it becomes.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping you would say, because there's a theme here, right? Like, so the more you do it, the easier it becomes, the more confident you become. You're gaining a skill. That's what I want to remind listeners, is this is not something that we just have. We've learned to turn it off, right? We learn at, I think the science tells us around 7 years old is when kids start to turn that off.
Yeah.
And they start noticing like, oh, my actions matter. I'm being judged. I'm noticing my skin. I'm noticing my hair. I'm noticing my clothes. That's what, like, if you think about kids, like if we can be as authentic and vulnerable as kids are, and we can carry that into our relationships that are deserving of that level of vulnerability, how amazingly beautiful would that be?
Real quick before you ask Sydney, because I know you had a question you wanted to ask her. That kid thing, those videos that we love on Instagram of the little like 5-year-old just like getting after it. Why do we love it? Because that kid doesn't give a fuck. That kid is so authentic to self, and they are just going to bring it for everyone to see. That's why we love it. Yeah. Because we want that. Okay, anyway.
No, I feel like we always go back to this childlike curiosity, but why can't we also have that childlike vulnerability?
Yeah,
Right? Yeah.
totally.
But I do want to preface, for me, vulnerability and authenticity, they mean very two different things for me as far as how I show up in my day to day. Authenticity to me is for me. That is for me knowing in who I am intrinsically and not looking for external validation.
Hmm.
And I can go out to a softball game, to a theater, to a nightclub or a bar, whatever, wherever I'm going, right? And I'm going to be me and I'm not going to care what the external pressures are around me. That's me showing up authentic. My vulnerability comes into my connections of close interpersonal relationships. And that is allowing, like, I kind of like the definition of like allowing people to wound you,
Hmm.
right? Because that is, I'm allowing you into an intimate part of myself that is inviting you to have the ability to hurt me. But I'm going to trust our relationship that that's not your intention. And for me, I agree with you, Cindy, where they need to be together because in order for me to even be vulnerable, I need to know I'm safe and accepted for who I am and my own authentic self. So they do,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm really glad that you said that. That was really beautiful what you said. And um, kind of tying into Kylie's, what she said, how, how when you asked her how are you able to do that? How are you be able to be your most authentic self, after everything you've been through? And I think, something again, Brene Brown has from following her for several years, she says when things get really, really tough, when like, maybe you're a little nervous to say something, but like deep inside this is you initially want to stray away from a conversation, but she says just start leaning in a little bit more each time. Just when things get really tough and you find that inner resistance, just lean in a little bit more each time. And I feel like that's how we become more authentic. It's just practicing leaning in during the hard moments. And it is, Kristen, like you said, very hard to lean in sometimes when you want to feel safe. But when we feel safe inside of ourselves, but like, okay, yes, I'm opening up myself to be hurt, but you know what? Even if I do get hurt, because, all humans, we're all flawed. And even the ones that we do trust have the ability to hurt us and hurt us the most. And yeah, they might fail and they might hurt us. And I'm sure that they will eventually, but like we will be okay. Just affirming yourself inside, be like, I'm going to be, even if they do hurt me, I am going to be okay, because
Yeah.
me, I got my back.
Yes, yes, I love that. One thing that I'm as a mom when I tell my girls is, and they hate this every time I say it because they, kids come to you and they want to be rescued. They want to feel safe. But I always tell them like the best teacher of life is life. Life is going to give you skills. I can't choose for you how you're going to react. All I can do is emulate the skill that I hope that you have. But unfortunately, you got to feel this one, kid. You got to sit in it, and I'm sorry, but life is gonna teach you. And we are gonna get hurt. And if we're constantly rescuing each other from pain, how are we even gonna grow? How are you gonna even know what you're capable of in those moments?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
Boo! Yeah, you're so funny. I asked a question. How do you guys think that before when we lost you for a second there, I was asking Kylie about how do you think that social media has impacted authenticity these days?
I think it's impacted like the subconscious thoughts because a lot of people feel pressure, have heard a lot of conversation about, doom scrolling and, unfollowing people because, they compare themselves. And for a while I was like, I'm not comparing myself, to all these people. Like I'm happy that they're whatever, doing all the things. But I realized in the back of my mind, like in my subconscious, like it was affecting me because even though I was happy for all these things that I was seeing, um, it reminded me of what I didn't have, you know. And the more I did it, the more I practiced that, the more I think the more I started stuffing down. So Yeah. It,
Yeah. Yeah.
Were you done? I like I said, I don't ever want to
Yep.
cut anybody off.
No,
Okay.
go ahead.
So for me, I remember when Pinterest first came on the scene and, Pinterest parties and Pinterest homes. And I know it's still a thing. Instagram, all the social media. I feel like the majority of the impact has been negative because people are, for the most part, are not sharing the pains that life is teaching them. And they are highlighting the amazing moments, which, like, yeah, share the joy. Awesome. Just make sure you also share the pain, not from a place of I need sympathy, commiserate, tell me how awful that was, but from a place of I had this amazing thing. I also have this going on. And I remember there was a post that somebody did where they had the picture that they posted to Instagram and then they zoomed out and it was like a cake or something like that, right? And so it's this beautifully adorned cake, and from what you can see of the kitchen, it's just like one of those fancy kitchens and it's just immaculately clean, and you zoom back and there is shit everywhere, like the baking ingredients, there's a kid on the floor crying, like it's just like an explosion of chaos, right? And I think that's an important reminder for us when we are consuming content to be intentional about which creators we consume media from, because are they going to be more like that picturesque little itty bitty snapshot, or are they going to let us see that that's a part of it? Yeah, but there's also all of this too. And that's very much where I try to come at my social media for my personal stuff, but also for my business. I mean, when we were getting ready to hit the record button, I'm like, you look so cute, Kristen. I'm like, and here I am in my hoodie and haven't showered yet because, just got back from a trip and my boys needed the time this morning. And so I decided it didn't matter to show up in a hoodie without showering.
It's
I love your hoodie, by the way.
Thank you.
representing ourselves. I love your perspective on that. I always see those Instagram versus reality, those, right? And I love that people are starting to bring that. But one of the things that comes to mind for me is there's so much competition online. There's so much ego that's we're getting validated from an external validation before we go internal. And I think that that is one thing that's stopping us from being vulnerable because of fear. There's this space of fear of judgment, and I'm not at the same caliber. I remember when we were all trying to start our social media and our coaching space, and like the idea of recording for me, I was just like, oh my gosh, this is just, I don't know if I can do this. Like there's a lot of my own imposter syndromes and self-sabotage and negative thoughts about myself. And I was like surrounded by these amazing, beautiful coaches that reminded us that no, just do it and do it scared, right? But I want to talk about like the ability to create that confidence within yourself, to know you are worthy of taking up space. You are not the same as anybody else because we all have different paths that led us to this amazing place that we call today and the present. And I want to just touch on for just this fact that like a lot of people typically capture moments of joy in a photo because those are things that we want to remember, because joy in a sense of feeling in our brains and how we're feeling it, that those moments actually last only a few moments to a few hours, where sadness lasts hours and days and even longer because we sit and we analyze it. So I think it's great that we're sharing the joys, but I also think there's this beautiful gift that we have called discernment, where we can make good judgment calls based on, hey, that person had an amazing moment of joy. Let's celebrate that, versus comparing what we don't have.
Yes.
It's always seeing what you don't have, I think, is what is the catalyst to fear and judgment, right?
Yeah.
In that moment. And instead of like, let's applaud them and say, good for you, I'm rooting for you.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the healing, like a healed person, a And I don't mean that in a judgment if you're not there yet. I just think when you are at least coming from that place of healing, of authenticity, you recognize that celebrating that person's win takes nothing away from me, right? That is, we can just love this moment for this person, whatever it is that we are celebrating. And it doesn't have anything to do with me. It's that boundary, right? Of that healthy boundary of realizing giving to them doesn't have to take from me. And I don't have to be doing what they're doing. I don't have to be at the level that they're performing at. I don't have to hold myself to them. I need to hold myself to me.
Yeah, that brings up something for me. You guys know who Mel Robbins is. She's got the let them
Yeah, yeah,
theory.
yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of people are forgetting the let me part of that theory.
Mhm.
It's let them, but don't let them walk over me. Let them have their authenticity and let me choose how I react to it.
Yeah.
And that's a big part. Like a lot of people are getting that, like the tattoo, let them. And I'm like, I want the let me on my arm. I'm like, remind me that I get to choose. I have the choice. And I think that that's where a lot of people go. I'm not going to say wrong, but they go into a place of fear, of self-sabotage, is they're concerned more about others before they think about putting themselves in the driver's seat,
Yeah.
that first position, and realizing you have the power. And when you do that, you take back the power. And that's what I love about that. Just let them. Let them so I can be me. Hey.
Yes.
So what would you, I'm gonna ask you guys if you could recommend one thing for people to be allow themselves to be vulnerable today or this week, to give a challenge. Does something come to mind for you guys? Choose one little thing. If you like to dance, dance in the middle of a good song when you're at the checkout line, just something that makes you feel good. I'm gonna say this. I want to say that being vulnerable doesn't mean oversharing. It means allowing
Yes.
yourself to be seen. It's uncomfortable, but it's the key to real connection. And that's kind of right. If we could challenge people to be more vulnerable today, just allow yourself to be seen in a moment that maybe you wouldn't normally let yourself be seen.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be in more of those performative pieces like dance, singing. Da, da, da. What's coming up for me is
See,
have the
I
hard
like to dance in the middle of it everywhere.
have the hard conversation, whether that's a
Good one.
conversation with yourself, whether that's a conversation with your significant other, with your friend, your child, whoever it is, that conversation that you've been avoiding, embrace it and realize you might fuck it up. But if you do, you just own that part too. And it's okay in a conversation to say, I didn't like the way that came out. May I try again? Can I redo? Most people who are in true connection with you are going to be okay with that. So for me, I'm feeling like the challenge that needs to go out is have the difficult conversation.
I like that one. Okay, mine's lighthearted and fun. Go. Yours is be a grown up and have the hard conversation. Did you think of it? Did we spark any inspiration in you, Cindy? We could challenge.
Yeah, I think I'll go somewhere in a similar direction, but also maybe speak to someone who's listening who doesn't know where to start. So I would say over the next week, if something is hard for you to do, or you feel a lot of inner resistance to saying run away, I challenge you to reflect at the end of your week, the end of your day, every day, and write down what those resistances are. Identify what that is and move in the direction of why is this hard for me? How can I show up better? How could I have communicated better to be my most authentic self? So starting at the root, trying to identify what those inner resistances are. So and that's kind of hard work. So yeah.
Yeah.
Recognizing the patterns, I think, is paramount, and just being that level of awareness and bringing and recognizing our own actions and having that agency and knowing what we're contributing to and holding ourselves back. I think that was a great one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, to wrap up this conversation, we're going to bring it back to Brene. She says, choosing authenticity means cultivating the courage to be imperfect, to set boundaries, and to allow ourselves to be vulnerable. Exercising the compassion that comes from knowing that we are all made of strength and struggle, and nurturing the connection and sense of belonging that could only happen when we believe that we are enough. That is the root of authenticity. Believe that you are enough. Lean into that. Let that be your mantra this week. Let that be your permission slip. And we hope that you will tune in next time for more conversations like this.
Yeah, and we're gonna go ahead and make a link tree for the wonderful Brene Brown things we referenced to today. I'll make sure those get in there this week.
Perfect.
Thank you for listening. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you. We'll see you next time.
See you next week.
Bye.
We open up the idea that this isn't a weakness, but the keys to true connection. Because the more we show up as ourselves, the deeper we connect.
Come back every week for more laughs, more truth bombs, and more permission to do your life your way.